Well, welcome back to AM&TK.
This is AM.
This is TK. So in our last episode, we spoke a bit how you started your career. If you haven't
A
listened
million
to that,
years ago. No.
you should listen to that if you haven't yet before you watch this one.
Spoiler. No. I don't know.
Or you actually don't, but then you get the beginnings, and it was interesting to hear how you went into television without it being your wish, but it kind of happened, and the outside world took you on or supported you with that. And we were in Madrid, where you basically learned it all about television, your beginnings.
It was a small production house out there. Yeah.
So maybe we can go on.
Shout out to Jose Joaquin Sanz, who was my first teacher in TV production. Really, I mean, he was the owner of the production company, and he always really motivated me to move forward and stuck with me through my learning pains.
Are you still in touch? Probably.
Yeah, on Facebook.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the silver lining to Facebook, is to stay in touch. But yeah, it's been a long time. I would be happy to see him again. So if you're watching, Jose Joaquin, be happy.
Still
to
in Madrid?
As I know, between Madrid and Miami, I think.
And then at some point you went back to the US. You did go back to the US.
Yes, I went to. Well, okay, so I'm in Madrid. I'm interviewing, Enrique Iglesias with his first album, Shakira with her first album.
Oh,
yeah, like
wow.
Talking back in the day.
Her first Spanish album? No.
Yeah. She started in Spanish.
She was like so young.
Yes, she was. She's not that much younger than me. But yes, we were of the same generation. So all these guys, because they all came through Spain, so to speak, Alejandro Sanz, or yeah.
So you actually really these are world stars now. You really saw them from when they were beginning. You were beginning and they were beginning.
Yes. It's been a very kind of unique in my mind, growth, kind of parallel career development. We were kind of there for the beginning of all of our careers. Antonio Banderas, Penelope Cruz, Javier Bardem. These are all people that I spoke to originally back in the day.
Wow.
We were all very young and just starting our
on
careers.
Experience and just Is there an anecdote that's something that stayed with you that is either funny or something that
oh gosh, the anecdote, I mean, I just remember Eros Ramazzotti, huh?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just remembered him too. Yeah, it's just Ricky Martin. I mean, all of these people we were all kind of starting our careers at the same time. And yeah, I mean, gosh, so just the idea of seeing, I remember Enrique Iglesias sitting in the middle of this crowd of reporters and just looking so young and sitting on a stool, and it was like people in around and presenting his first album, and it just looking like just so young, and inexperienced somehow, and really like putting himself out there, because that album he put out without his father knowing. So he started his musical career on the DL, and his father didn't know, because he didn't want that, right? And he didn't, as I remember it, he didn't want to have to live up to that, and he didn't want to expose himself to, I don't know, his father's thoughts. I don't know. But so things like this. And I remember waiting for Shakira. It turned out we were always waiting for Shakira.
She was always late?
Yes.
Already?
For her whole career with with media, there was always some kind of delay. And I remember her at the time, this little powerhouse of a person who just, waiting at this bar nightclub, for her to appear. And I remember my producer saying, oh, God, this girl with her little toy guitar. And I'm like, I don't know, buddy. I think there's potential there. I remember having that conversation. And of course now she's like a superstar.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, so many kind of anecdotes like this of just the beginnings, and Penelope being just very actually quite very down to earth, and Javier was always quite down to earth, I have to say, but
They weren't a couple at
they weren't a couple at the time, although I don't know, some of their first movies together were a little racy, so I
the plant was the seed was planted.
I think so. But anyway, so I that's how I started, just doing these interviews, and I also did some artists, and I did some cultural events, and it was a bit wider. It wasn't only these celebrities, but of course that's what everybody wanted was the celebrities. So, but then I was on a scholarship, and that money runs out. So when I told my producer I'm running out of money, can you pay me more or something? And he said, I can't.
Oh.
Yeah. So he's like, I can't afford to keep you on for more than I'm paying you. So I said, well, then I got to go. And then he's like, all right. It was great knowing you.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were okay to say, okay, I'm not going to do this because it doesn't pay.
Yes. Somehow I had to make I had to make a living. My parents weren't supporting me. So once the scholarship money ran out, and I was no longer, and I couldn't live off of 15,000 pesetas at the time a month, I just couldn't do it. So I went home, packed up my bags and I went home.
Back to the US, back to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And then you had a home at CNN.
And then I went through a really low point because I was disappointed. I really wanted to have continued at that point, and I wanted to have stayed in Madrid, and I didn't want to pack it up and come home. And I didn't know. I think it was also now what kind of thing. And do I go back to school? Did
you feel like you failed?
Somehow, yes. Because I always felt like I failed if the next day didn't come. Like I took total responsibility. So it felt like I could always have done something else. Even to this day, I'm always thinking I can always do, this didn't work out. Well, what else could I have done?
But maybe that was the path. I mean, that was maybe kind of destiny to
come back to the US. I think so. I mean, it seemed like that chapter just closed there. And like Switzerland, perhaps for me now, back then, there just weren't that many avenues. There was a state-owned TV, there was 2 or 3 cable channels, but there wasn't a lot of content being produced. So I didn't have a natural home there in media.
To the millennials out there, it was not a time, there was no YouTube, no Facebook, no Instagram. You couldn't just pop up your own camera and do your own thing. You were dependent on being working for an organization, right? And then those organizations were also scarce.
Yes. So there was very few open doors in that sense. And so like I said, I came home and I was very depressed for about a month. I was really pretty down. Like I didn't leave the house. Like I was just shuffling around in my bathrobe until finally my mother, to her credit, was like, okay, in her Cuban way, se acabó. Basta with this. You're going to get yourself dressed. You're going to wash your hair. I had dreads going by then. You're going to wash your hair and you're going to take yourself on down to CNN. And you're going to ask them. Yes. And she said, they told you that you would have a home there. So you go find out right now if you have a home there. So at that point, she really was like, she was that kind of push that I needed to get out the door. And here we go. And this is the other moment where I always feels like a bit surreal. But I remember knocking on the glass. The CNN Center, most of the newsrooms are there's glass so you can look in, for the tours. And I remember knocking on the glass and catching the attention of a former colleague, a former intern. And I was like, hey. And he's like, what? What are you doing? What? Come on. What are you doing here? I thought you were in Spain. Tell him the story. And he's like, well, this is your lucky day. I said, really, why? He said, because they need somebody in the LA bureau ASAP. And I thought, and you think that's me? At that point, I'm still like, me? What? And he's like, yes, they want somebody who's young and who's had some kind of entertainment news experience. And yeah, so, and he took me up to the office. And that day they said, yes, we need somebody. You want to go?
to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I mean, for the ones that saw episode 1, or the first part where we talked about your story, when you applied for an internship, they said it's usually 1 year that you have to wait, but no, you speak Spanish, okay, you can start. So it is kind of luck, but also what you bring coming together, emerge.
Somehow, yes. Yeah, it's a collection of these things. Yeah.
Wow. And then how much longer?
Well, so that was the beginning, and I can fast forward from there. But I moved to LA. I hadn't never been further west than like Denver, Colorado. So it was a whole new experience for me to go out there and to live on my own out there with a job and all of these things. And off the bat, I was hired to anchor my own show,
Which was called?
Escenario, every day.
Yeah.
So a daily show. I mean,
Wow.
you know what what that is.
And how long was the show?
I want to say half an hour.
Wow. Every day?
Every day. 30 minutes. Yeah, it was 30 minutes every day. And they hooked me up with a producer there she was already there, but they already told me that they'd hired somebody before and she left after like a month or two because they had personality clashes.
Oh.
And then I come in and I'm like, super naive and super just enthusiastic and terrible.
Wow.
Terrible. She was terrible. I'm not going to say her name.
No, you don't have to. We don't want to.
No, but we had just a terrible meeting of the minds. I mean, I just no. But I get it. I get it. She was at the top of her game until she got married and quit. And then she went back to work in her 40s. She was already in her 40s at this time. And, she dreamt of having my job. And she thought that if this other girl was out of the way, then they would be like, oh, but you're such a great producer and you can do everything on your own. You can have that job. And then they bring me in from Europe, because they had to move all my stuff over. And she told me to my face at one point that she could not believe that she had lost the job to a pretty 23-year-old. And I was like, that's not my fault.
Yeah.
It's not my fault. But she blamed me every second of every day that she stayed. And
Which is not fair.
Of course it's not fair. Of course it's not fair. And
it's probably also hard. It was probably a hard thing for her as well if she dreamt so much to have that, which is not your fault. But you cannot let that. I mean, one can understand her disappointment, but she shouldn't show it, right? She should be professional.
Me. Yeah, she shouldn't blame me.
She shouldn't blame you, yes.
And within her resentment, she did try to support me. Like she took me shopping one day, and I remember she had me over to dinner one day, and she tried to kind of, but never. I mean, listen, all I can say is the day she quit.
She quit.
Yeah, she eventually quit. But I used to cry like in the morning before going to work.
Wow.
Because I was like, I've left. I don't even know. I've taken this risk. I've made this jump. I'm here.
And willing. They wanted you.
And they wanted me, and she would ignore me. I mean, hard, just really hard. I've actually never talked about it openly, but it was really hard. And I don't think she knows how hard she made it for me because she was so focused on how upset she was. And eventually, like I said, she quit, thankfully. And then they sent my second producer, Juan Miguel Muñiz. I love you, but you know that.
He was a saver. Yes.
He was very different from me, very introverted, and I was super extrovert. So sometimes I think it made me bananas that he was so quiet. Actually, it did make me bananas that you were so quiet.
So maybe because he was an introvert, you were forced to be more of an extrovert?
Maybe. But, many times it could be silence for hours in the office because he wasn't a talker. And so that was also kind of a learning dynamic. But again, he's the one who was just full of patience and professionalism, and he was the one that kind of moved our team forward, and I learned a lot from him. And yeah, and then after that, eventually you find your legs, right, and things start to fall into place. But as you know, I was there for over 10 years.
10 years.
Over 10 years. Yeah.
Over 10 years. Wow. I wonder what made you stick in the beginning. Were there moments where you thought, okay, I cannot take this working environment is, I mean, we all talk about working environments that are not good. And sometimes we say, I mean, you read in these HR stuff, like if you don't like it, you should quit and do something. Were there moments where you thought, I'm going to just leave, or what made you stay?
That's a good question. What made me stay? I think not really having like another option at the time, not having something to, I was like, what am I go back to Atlanta and do what? And I'm an optimist. So I'm always looking for the silver lining. And I kept thinking, it's going to get better. I'll get better at my job. She will hate me less. And I don't know if she hated me, but she will be nicer, and things will just kind of get better. I think that's what and at the time when I first moved, my father spent a month with me. He's a university professor for many years. And so he had kind of like December, he had some weeks off at the end of the year. So we're talking like
the semester holidays.
Yes, semester holidays, right before Christmas. Anyway, he came and spent a month with me and helped me set up my apartment and buy a car, and because I wasn't capable of doing that. It was a mix of she can't handle it with actually I think wanting to be there for me.
Yeah,
right?
to have someone that
Yeah, and he was, but so he spent that time with me, and he was supportive in that sense, because I think in his kind of detached way was like, yeah, it's just keep going. Like he just would motivate me to just get up and go. Just go. It'll get better. And then anybody, honestly, at that point in time, a lot of people, if I turned to somebody, it was like, just make the best of it. This is a job that a million girls would die for. So make it work. And somehow, and somehow I did. Honestly, I think I just outlived her,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's if it's also good to have a bit of persistence and not give up. I mean, there are several ways. Of course, their working environment can be so bad, or things happen that you're like, no, I have to make cut. But here you're like, okay, there are chances that this might change, and eventually one outlives.
Eventually she got fed up.
Exactly. Then it's who has the energy to stay longer.
Somehow. But at that point, she's where I am now. She had a family, she had kids, so she had a life.
So maybe also her priorities shifted. And then, so now you were talking about this producer that had kids and everything. So at that time you were on your own in LA, 10 years after. Now we're here in Switzerland. Totally different. I know you as a working mom. That's what I know you, how I know you. So I don't know these times. It's interesting to hear. So that's maybe a big jump, but
yeah, I mean, so I worked, I built up my career on the West Coast, and at that point, did kind of everything possible there. And then in 2010, I said, we had another shuffle in management. CNN has had a few of these over the last few years. So another shuffle, and they said, my contract was also finishing. They said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to the East Coast. And they said, well, cool, but we don't have a place for you on the East Coast. So then I said, well, I can't stay on the West Coast anymore. Like, I'm just done here for a myriad of reasons, personally and professionally. I think the biggest factor was just that I was ready. I was, as a journalist, you build your life on telling other people's stories. And I was immersed in this. I was lost in this persona of other people's storytelling.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Because I didn't have a real personal life outside of my job.
Yeah.
I didn't cultivate it. I had friends. I knew people, but everybody was in the industry. My socializing happened within the business. When I was on holiday, I would go to see my parents. So I just didn't take the time to do that.
Wow, that I never thought of that. But yes, that as a journalist or a reporter, storyteller, you're telling other people's stories. So it's good we're telling our stories right now.
Yeah, somehow it's a very sort of, it's not a place where I go often, which is telling my story as opposed to listening to somebody else's. And I'm happy to do that, especially if they're inspiring or there are stories that I am also connected to or, news or things that are important for people. I'm happy to do that. But I just reached a point where it was like, I have to I have to live my own life now. I have to materialize my own story. And at the time I had met my now Swiss husband. And so when I decided that I didn't want to stay on the West Coast, and they said, then I said, so then I guess I'm done, And then he said, come to Switzerland.
Okay, I'm gonna make a stop here again because it's so interesting, but I feel like we should give it another episode.
Are you kidding me right now? Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
It's so interesting, but I think we keep that for the next episode.
We are never going to get to your story. It's going to be 2022.
It doesn't matter.
And we're still talking about me? That's incredible.
Yeah, my story will be shorter.
Well, because I'm older.
But I like that with as a journalist, you tell other people's stories. And I'm glad that you're sharing yours now. So in our next episode, we'll hear about how you started off in Switzerland and how you actually came here.
And that is a shorter story. That is a much shorter story. So hopefully we will also be able to at least get into your story, Tanya, by the next episode.
We have many episodes ahead. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, AM&TK. And thank you very much for watching and see you next time.
That's right. Take care, everybody.